So, yes, hi Abhilash. We are very excited to welcome you on the VAPT session today, and we have gone live. And as soon as people start jumping into our session, we get to see that they are joining in. We have just started a little early, Abhilash, and as we talk, we will get to see people joining in the session. So,
Yeah, thank you for having me, Sam. Sounds good to me, all the things.
Yes. And today we are very excited to also announce that we are live on two streams, in fact. This is the first time we are going simultaneously live on both LinkedIn as well as YouTube, and we will be really looking forward to both sets of audiences commenting and giving questions, and I think you will have a fantastic interaction session today. I'm also looking forward to the same. So Abhilash, I would like to know certain things before we formally start the session at 7. Is
Mhm.
that um, what are the kinds of companies or the people that come across that are now very aware of VAPT and they know the impact of getting this implemented?
Okay, this is really a good question. So, the thing is, earlier, like when I started my VAPT journey, so that
Yeah.
was a time when people, the companies which are already well established, which are mandated by some ISO standards or security standards. So they used to, or like companies like banks or financial institutions where there was a money involved or a sensitive data involved. So only those companies were interested to get the VAPT done, to get the advanced red teaming sessions done for their applications, for their infrastructure. But
Mhm.
now, as you know, like there's a increase in bug bounty hunters nowadays, like since last 2 to 3 years, and people are learning more security things like how to catch bugs, how to try to get a bug bounty, etc. And that's where they have started to target small companies as well, like which are even not into a very crucial business like e-commerce, but they have the internet presence, and now they are well aware that even if we have an internet presence, we need to be secure, because at least there's a brand value involved. Like if we get hacked, so our brand value gets maligned. So that's where everybody who is having a internet presence nowadays, who is having some good business, we can call it as a startup or a big company, is looking to get VAPT done from outside vendors or from their inside consultants.
All right, all right. So, Abhilash, do you see this trend somewhat post COVID, this acceptance of VAPT and understanding the importance of getting it implemented in even the smallest of companies? Do you see a stark change post COVID?
Uh, we can say that post COVID was a little increase, I can say, because uh, again, like many even security engineers started doing bug bounty as they were working from home. But yeah, this even the government support to digitization and security, some of the moves by Indian government also led people to think about the security assessments of their applications.
All right, all right. So, and how do you see a change in awareness also? I mean, earlier, did you struggle, or did you see the people who were implementing VAPT had a time, allocated to just explain that why it has to be implemented? And now, do you see that the acceptance that this conversation of why you need to get this done, it's reducing now. People already know that it has to be done. It has to be
Right.
implemented. Do you see a difference in that perception?
Yes, absolutely. So there was a trend before that they will protect everything by going by some audit or some standard, but actually testing your controls is really important, and that's where people found that like we have everything, the hardened image, all our systems are hardened. We have web application firewall, all different different IDS IPS devices, but still people are getting to manage into their network or application. That's where there's awareness that uh, getting a simulated type of testing is required, so that you can also improve your IDS IPS capabilities, firewall capabilities, and absolutely like your SIEM capabilities as well.
Yeah, so I do see that. I think it has become a raging career now, because there's so many things that are considered as threat, and there are so many things that people can do in order to arm themselves up and establish themselves as a company which has ensured security in at various levels to their clients, in front of their clients, right?
Yes, I agree.
So over, yeah, now since it is already 7 and we are having people joining in, this was just a conversation that I was having with our today's speaker, which is Abhilash Gangane. And you haven't missed out anything, guys. And we are today live from both LinkedIn as well as YouTube. The sessions are being recorded, and recordings will be shared over your email IDs. We will be sharing a Google form in the middle of this session, also at the end of the session. So do keep an eye on that. Fill your forms, and there are free takeaways as well today. We never let our audience or people go without something, so there is something which Abhilash has promised even today, and he will be sharing that, and we will be sharing that with you. So we are sharing today a VAPT learning mind map, or step by step guide, which will be extremely useful. So hang on till the last of the session. And this this will be a session Abhilash will be taking about implementing VAPT from scratch, and we will be taking pause and take your questions from time to time. So do keep posting your questions. We will allow Abhilash a break at times, and we will take in the relevant questions, and Abhilash will be happy to answer them for you throughout the session. Okay? So, yeah. Mm. So at the moment, you need not fret about the recordings. All the things will be shared. So it's 7-2, and I think we're having people still joining in. But now I think we should start with the session. So, Abhilash, over to you. Really looking forward to a very electrifying session today. A lot of takeaways and lots of knowledge, which is really worth sharing. We really look forward to a very, very enthusiastic session. Over to you, Abhilash.
Yeah, thank you, Sayana. And first of all, I would like to thank Ministry of Security, MOS, and Santosh for giving me this opportunity to present in front of large audience which is already like well aware of the cybersecurity trends, job market, etc. And I'm very happy to present whatever I know and how I started my journey in VAPT. And I'm also looking forward to guide people. Means I already did that, but I'm looking forward to guide some people starting their VAPT journey. Wherever means I'll be happy to answer their questions, their understand their genuine problems where they are stuck, etc. So let's start. So first of all, I just wanted to check if you can see my screen. Hi Sayana, can you confirm that for me?
No, I cannot. So just please share the screen once more. I'll
Okay.
stream it.
Yeah, I just shared the screen.
So, people who are there, can you please confirm whether you can see the screen? I can see the screen.
Okay, I think. Sayana, can you
Yes,
check?
now. Yes, yes. In YouTube and LinkedIn, both we can see it. Yes.
Oh, okay, okay, cool. So, thank you, audience, for joining. I know it's Sunday evening, and thanks for sparing some time in the evening just to know more about VAPT and how to learn that. So, I'll just start with my session. So, before that, I wanted to give my introduction. So, I have total 7 years of experience doing VAPT and application security, you can say. My core skills are application security. So, I do everything in application security, right from doing a VAPT for web, mobile, APIs, thick clients, to doing a security assessments in Kubernetes or Docker kind of environments. I also do the source code reviews for my company and for my clients. The another core skill that I have is a VAPT. Other than that, spear phishing, email security, and endpoint security is something that I handle for my current company. So I have few certifications in my bucket, like CEH did a few years back. Then I'm a certified Kubernetes administrator. So I did this just to learn the Kubernetes and the to know more about the security insights in the Kubernetes platform containerization. I am certified in cybersecurity from IC Square. I also did the CCSK, which is a cloud basic cloud certification, and I'm a CCNA as well. Uh, I'm an electronics and telecommunication engineer by graduation, and I'm currently pursuing my MBA. So that's about me. Means I had experience working with Ernst and Young EY, then Network Intelligence India, and I Consulting, one of the endpoint security company called eScan Antivirus, a Mumbai-based company, and I'm now currently in a Cohesity Storage Solutions. Okay, so I'm moving to my today's topic, which is what is VAPT and how to learn that. So first of all, like I just want to tell you the difference between vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. So some of you might know that these are two different things. Some of you might not know that these actually, like, differentiate, but always be speak combinedly. So first of all, anything you identify as a vulnerability and then you report. So that's a vulnerability assessment, that you identified the vulnerability. You have a classification already, or you may not have. Then you will look for the classification, like what is this vulnerability, whether it's a web based, a network based, whether it's a RC, or whether it's a injection, like kind of SQL injection, whether it's exploitable or it's non-exploitable. So classifications can be multiple. So when you identify a vulnerability, you will know a class of that vulnerability. Then you also try to prioritize which vulnerability to fix first if you have two or multiple vulnerabilities. And that can be done over network infrastructure, computer systems, and applications. Applications can be any web, mobile, APIs, thick clients, etc. And this is like, so when you think about vulnerability assessment, your goal is to discover the known vulnerabilities. You cannot obviously discover the unknown vulnerabilities, because that will be known as zero day attacks. And if you are good enough, then you will definitely identify the zero days as well. But the goal of VA is to discover the known vulnerabilities across your environment. And the scope of this VA is wide and broad. So for example, you want to know all the vulnerabilities in your network, instead of focusing on one critical vulnerability. And that's where, like, you try to do a vulnerability assessment for your network infrastructure, for your application, etc. And as soon as you identify the vulnerability, you report that to your developers or to your client so that they can fix that vulnerability. So the outcome of VA is the list of vulnerabilities. Means what you will get at the end of vulnerability assessment is the confirmed list of vulnerabilities in a particular application that you are testing, or uh, or a network infrastructure you are testing. So the next thing is penetration testing. Means when once you identify a vulnerability, and now if you want to focus on any single vulnerability and to check how it will impact on my organization or for my client. So for example, you identified a SQL injection, and now you want to identify what you can do with SQL injection, whether you can actually exfiltrate data, whether you can run a remote code exploitation, like if you can take a reverse shell of through that SQL injection, or you can just see some data which is not so useful, and there are, like, limited privileges you have, and you didn't get anything useful out of that SQL injection. So that thing you will know only after doing a penetration testing, and that's where the goal of penetration testing is to discover and exploit vulnerabilities to show how hackers would use them for their benefits. So benefit can be anything. It can be a financial, it can be just a happiness of exploiting that vulnerability, but that will adversely affect that particular organization or the particular client. So the goal here is to go deep into a single vulnerability to identify its impact on a business, financially, or in terms of brand reputation. So the scope of penetration testing is focused and deep. Means you try to go as much as deep you can. So for example, you got a SQL injection. Through SQL injection, you got a RC, remote code exploitation, and through remote code exploitation, you could access one system. From that system, you laterally move to another system, and that's where you went from a web server to a database server, and now you have a position of database server as well. Uh, and that is like going deeper. Then after database server, there can be any other critical server, and you try to go as deep as possible. And it is like, means you only stop when you know that this is the crown jewel for this organization, and once I have that, the impact is so large that a business can stop, or means there will be a news in the market that this company is hacked, and that can happen with the penetration testing. The outcome of this penetration testing will be, prioritize list of vulnerabilities, how you actually exploit them, because it's just not that you exploit the vulnerabilities and report to the client. Client also wants to learn how the hacker exploited that vulnerability, and whether we were missing on some certain checks, like if the firewall was not there, if we allowed excessive permissions to the database user, what went wrong can be identified with the way that hacker exploits a particular vulnerability. So that we will also get a walkthrough, so step by step walkthrough, like how actually the hacker went and exploited that vulnerability and did the lateral movement into the network or into the application. And lastly, you will also get the remediations, like now how you can actually remediate these vulnerabilities. So if I have to tell you the example, uh, if you exploit a SQL injection, and if you can take a reverse shell, and if you can laterally move into your inside network, so in that case, just you know fixing the SQL injection will actually fix that particular vulnerability, and will stop the hacker from exploiting the same path again. But there can be different paths. So what is important is you also set the restrictive permissions on your database. You also use low privileged users on your web server, so that an attacker will not have a privileges to run anything else. And then you also harden your system, knowing that there were some components in your operating system that were easy to exploit in case of privilege escalation. And then you learn all those things as an outcome of penetration testing. So I'll just move forward on the next slide. Okay, so what actually security engineer does in case of VAPT? So if I'm doing a VAPT, so I should be able to explain what I'm doing in terms of VAPT. So this is the day-to-day job that I perform, or any VAPT engineer will do. So first of all, asset discovery. So means whether you are working for a client or for your own company, you need to know what is your what is your attack surface. So for example, if you don't know that you have this particular server available inside your inventory, and it is running and it is critical, so you will not touch that server for a VA. And that's where it is very important to discover the asset. So one of the
Just to
incident.
interrupt you, Abhilash, can you think you can increase the or zoom your slide a bit, because it seems for our YouTube users the slides, they're saying it's not clearly visible. So do you think you can zoom it a little bit?
One second, let me try.
Can someone please confirm if it's better? It's clear. Okay, okay, all right.
Okay, cool. So, thank you for that. So, the first thing is asset discovery. So, what I do in my day-to-day job is I have a script, you can say, or I do a asset discovery job regularly, quarterly or monthly, to identify newer assets that are available in my network infrastructure. And you can also do that over internet. Like if your company has a internet presence, multiple websites, your domain, multiple subdomains, etc. So you use the information gathering techniques like identifying the subdomains of your company, or uh, scanning for port 443 on the ASN that you own, uh, or that your company owns. So we use multiple different techniques to perform the asset discovery, whether it's a ping scan, whether it's a tool called nmap, or a tenableness. If I am doing a subdomain enumeration, I will use a tool called amas, so that I'll get to know like what all subdomains are available, what all websites are hosted by my company over internet. So I do the asset discovery. For that, I use different discovery techniques like host discovery techniques. So if you read nmap sometime in detail, so you will see there are many host discovery techniques as well. Like you can scan the entire network, you can specifically scan a IP, you can scan the host name. uh, the techniques that are mentioned, you can utilize them. The goal here is to identify all your assets. So there was a time like with my client. So there was an internal security engineer with that client, and they were scanning around 4,000 IP addresses in their tenablenesses without doing any asset discovery. And that was like, that scan was there since last 2 to 3 years, and they were scanning only 4,000 IP addresses. And we being their vendor, so what we did is we just ran a asset discovery in their network using their own tool called Tenable IO. And we found that they actually had a 25,000 assets in their network, and which were absolutely not identified by their organization because of lack of CMDB, you can say. And that time they got to know that okay, so they have 25,000 assets. Out of that, around 4 to 5,000 are critical servers which needs a VA or PT to be performed, at least vulnerability scanning to be performed. And that's how then they increased their Tenable licenses, and they started doing active VA scans to cover their entire attack surface. So at asset discovery is important that we do regularly in case of VAPT job. Next one is the vulnerability scanning. So most of the time people utilize licensed or licensed automated tools to perform the vulnerability scanning. There are some open source tools like OpenVAS as well, but Tenable Nessus is something that is quite famous. Qualys Guard is something which is quite famous to do this vulnerability scanning. And what it does is it does the network vulnerability scanning. Now these tools also has the support for web, but there are specific web scanners as well, like Akunetics or NetSparker in the industry, which are quite famous for their detection of web vulnerabilities. So then in the next step, we do the vulnerability scanning, and we try to identify the vulnerabilities that will be discovered by the automated tool only. But what is important here is to scan the configuration, to configure the scan policies basically. So for example, if you go by a default scan configuration, there's a high chance that you will be only scanning top 1,000 ports and not everything. So it's important to know your scan policies, whether you want to cover all 65 535 ports, whether you want to cover a web application pen testing or not. So that is something that you need to learn. This will be a tool specific because every tool has different settings, but the settings will be similar. Like I just told you, like whether you want to cover the entire ports or a limited ports or a specific services, etc. So based on that, and again, like based on the network infrastructure that you are scanning, there can be limitations. So for example, you cannot use DOS techniques through your scans, because those are some critical components like power devices which go offline if you perform the DOS attack on that particular system. So in that case, you need to segregate those systems separately, and you have to create a separate policy where you will disable some plugins which can perform the DOS attacks, and then you will scan those assets according to that policy. So that's what we do regularly. There are different requirements daily, like this is the new asset we are hosting, now we need the scanning. This cannot handle the load, so you need to do a slow scanning, so you need to adjust the threads, etc. So that's what we configure in the tools like Tenable. Next one is the vulnerability identification. Is I know that Tenable Nessus or any other automated tool will provide you a list of vulnerabilities, but sometimes, like you being a small company, if you don't know, if you don't have possession of any good licensed tool, but like, means if you are using Nmap and you are doing a service scan, and now if you know that these are the services running in your particular infrastructure. So, for example, FTP this particular version, or HTTP this particular web server like Apache or IIS, and that particular version of IIS like 10.0. So, what you can do is you can go on a publicly available databases like CVE details or NVD, and where actually you can put your current software version. So, for example, IIS 10.0, and you can see a list of vulnerabilities that are available, right from critical to low, and then you can say that your version is vulnerable, like your IIS 10.0 version is vulnerable to these vulnerabilities, and you will just identify that this particular version is vulnerable to these CVs, and that's what you do in the vulnerability identification. This step is already there in the vulnerability scanning tools, but it can be done as a separate engagement as well, to identify your all the devices or devices, their versions, etc., through your CMDB, and then identify the vulnerabilities for them. Okay, so next step is vulnerability confirmation. So most of the scanners, so they rely on software versions to report the vulnerability. So for example, if Apache 2.24 is there and there are some XSS vulnerabilities on that, so any good scanner will tell you that they relied on the version reported by the Apache service, that it's 2.24, and therefore it is vulnerable to these attacks. You may have any other remediations for that. So for example, you already have a web application firewall, or you have removed any particular component that is vulnerable, but scanners may not be able to detect that, and they will just rely on the that particular version, and they will report you the vulnerabilities. So for that, you will use tools or scripts that are readily available in the Kali Linux, or most of the people like to share their work over a GitHub. So you can use GitHub scripts that are available for that particular vulnerability or a port, and you can confirm using a different tool whether the vulnerability is there or not. So if I have to tell you an example,
Okay, Abhilash, I'll just take a few questions. All right. Um, I would like to give a few important information as well. First question is we have from Shivaraja Malaya that there is a tool called Qualys. It hasn't been
yes.
mentioned. Is there any specific reason why you haven't?
No, so these are the tools that I use day to day. That's why I mentioned. But when I mentioned Tenable Nessus, the Qualys Guard is equivalent to that only. So what I did is I tried to cover only one tool from that particular area.
Okay, okay.
But
Abhilash,
I did mention that the Qualys Guard is also there.
all right, all right. Abhilash, there is a request from Jinesh in from our YouTube live that can you show us the screen of the tool? Do you think you will be
Uh,
able to show that?
I don't have it readily available, but
Okay,
I can share it afterwards. Or
okay,
if I have to tell you, Tenable Nessus Professional is available for 7 days free trial. It's just
okay.
a 50 MB setup you can download, and you can explore all the things in
Right.
that particular tool.
Okay, awesome. And
Yeah.
also to let others know that this session is being recorded. Okay. We will see whether we can share it in YouTube, LinkedIn, but definitely right now, just keep an eye. We are going to share our Google form Please ensure that you are filling in your details so that even if you're missing out on the YouTube or LinkedIn recorded live details whenever we are publishing it, we don't miss you over the email. So the Google form is being shared right now. Kindly fill in your details so that we can share the free takeaways at the end of the session. And also, the recorded session is something that you're not missing out on. Okay? Yeah, over to you again, Abhilash.
Yeah, thank you. So I was at vulnerability confirmation. So you can utilize multiple scripts that are available, open source scripts, open source tools available in the Kali Linux to confirm that particular vulnerability. So for example, if two or three tools can confirm that there's a vulnerability, you can actually go and report that vulnerability to your developers. Just because you confirmed with two different tools, two different kinds of tools, I will say, like not two different scanners only. So if I got something in tenablenesses for SNMP, so I will use a open source tool called SNMP walk to check whether I can actually see any IDs, SNMP IDs, by connecting to that particular SNMP port on that IP. Similarly, if I see any HTTP port and vulnerability reported by that particular component, so what I will do is I'll go on that particular port. I will use a Vapalizer and I will check whether the same version is there, same jQueries are mentioned there or not. So in that way, I will use two to three different tools if they are available to just confirm that particular vulnerability. So, okay, next is vulnerability prioritization. So this is something which is quite important because see, in a company where there are thousands of servers, you will have your tenable results or scanner results readily available, and your different infrastructure teams or developers will be working on some vulnerabilities. But let's suppose there's a 0 day kind of log4j or a recent downfall, Intel downfall vulnerability. So if that comes as in 0 day, so your goal should shift from whatever you are doing to actually manage the current vulnerability that is being exploited worldwide. So when there was a log4j, we had a vulnerabilities like RC SQL injection in an infra, but then we had to shift our focus to the log4j because that was being actively exploited at that time. So that was one of the vulnerability prioritization we did. That was based on the versions and the log4j versions that we had that time. So vulnerability prioritization can be based on severity. So for example, obviously you should prioritize critical vulnerabilities before medium or low. Then there's a next step called exploitability. So this is quite useful, the exploitability factor. So scanners will report vulnerabilities like outdated Python 2.7 version, and that will be reported as a critical vulnerability. But if you actually go and see the latest Python 2.7 version, there are no CVEs associated with that particular Python version. So in actual, there are no vulnerabilities on Python 2.7, but as scanner says, this is outdated. There will be no uh, security patches by the vendor, etc. And that's where the scanner is marking it as an critical or high. So in that case, you can actually reduce the vulnerability. I'll not reduce the vulnerability, but you can actually prioritize that latter compared to if the RC or SQL injection is there. So that is something means the vulnerabilities like outdated operating system. For example, Ubuntu 16 is outdated. There are some vulnerabilities on that. It is critical. But if the system is internal, it's nowhere exposed outside that particular VLAN segment, then it's okay to actually prioritize other critical vulnerabilities over that outdated OS, because that outdated OS can be a part of some testing for the client. It can be a part of some sandboxing that developers are trying to do and trying to check their functionalities on the older systems. So instead of like going by the criticality there, you should also check the exploitability, whether it is possible to exploit, considering all different factors, that whether the system is publicly available, like publicly accessible, or it is a private, it is in the private network, it is in the DMZ, and based on that you can take the decision. One of the better things that scanners like Tenable Nessus or Qualys Guard offers is they tell you whether the exploits are available or not for this particular vulnerability, and if available, whether those are available in the metasploit or those are some proprietary scripts or what. So these scanners will tell you that, oh, okay, so this particular vulnerability has an exploit readily available in the metasploit, and metasploit is a quite common tool for vulnerability exploitation, and anybody can just use that particular script and exploit the vulnerability. So this is something you should prioritize against your outdated OS. So that's what the prioritization is. Then next thing is asset categories as well. So you might have a system which is in a QA, which is not holding any sensitive data, and then you will have a system which is super critical, production system. So obviously you will prioritize vulnerabilities on the production system compared to QA systems. And next one is the data classification, whether the data label is internal or it is the customer data, client data, whether it's a financial data, so whether it's a PII. So based on that also you will prioritize the vulnerabilities. uh, so for example, there are two versions of SQL injection in which at one point the customer's private data is being exposed, at other point your QA systems passwords are being exposed. So now you will decide what is more important, like protecting those internal passwords or protecting the customer data, and based on that you will have some guidance through your senior management, and they will tell you that you focus on the this particular customer data system or this particular QA system where passwords are being exposed. So yeah, that is vulnerability prioritization. So we do day to day the prioritization. Next is vulnerability exploitation. So this is where PT is coming into a picture, penetration testing. So now if
Abhilash, do you think we can take a few questions right now?
yeah, yeah, sure.
So we have a question. What is the factor in the CVSS base score?
Factor.
Yes.
Okay, so factor I can say some property where there are three, like the different scores. So for example, uh, any vulnerability, when you decide the severity of that vulnerability, what is most important is you are protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So these can be the factors that a confidentiality is being hampered. So that's where uh, your CVSS score will be more. If none of the confidentiality, integrity, availability is being hampered, but there are some environmental factors and a little bit of confidentiality exposure. So based on that, also there can be some differences in the CVSS. So different factors, major of them will be confidentiality, integrity, availability. Apart from that, there will be factors like how exposed your system is, whether it's on the internet, whether it's on the LAN, whether it's in the particular segmented VLAN. So these are the factors to consider while calculating the CVSS.
Okay. So next is we want to know, is there any difference between agent and agentless vulnerability scanning tools?
Okay, yeah, there's a difference. There's a difference. So first of all, agentless scanning tools. So you identify network vulnerabilities by scanning that particular IP, identifying the open ports, and then identifying the running services, whether those services are vulnerable or not. But if you provide credentials, so for example SSH credentials, so your scanners can actually log into your particular system, and they can identify now the OS based vulnerabilities as well, where in the credential scanning. But now if your scanner has agents already, so those agents can actually work as a credential scanning method of the scanner. So for example, instead of providing the SSH credentials, the agent is already running on that particular system. It has all the privileges that are required, so it will provide you the more number of vulnerabilities related to the network as well as related to that particular underlying system. So that's the difference. I mean, in case of agent-based vulnerability scans, you will get insights of your OS vulnerabilities, package vulnerabilities as well. In case of agentless scanning, if you are providing the credentials, then only you will get, based on the privileges of that credentials, you get to know the vulnerabilities of that system. If no credentials provided at all, you will just get the vulnerabilities on the open ports and services running.
All right. So, Abhilash, the next question is: there is something from Mr. Siddharth Agarwal who said, "I tried implementing OpenVAS. However, it requires root access on other VMNs to scan it. Is this safe? And does such VA tools brings additional risks?"
VA tools, yeah, does bring additional risks, but miss prior permissions from your senior management is required. So, so things can go wrong in case of VAPT. So, for example, you now need to perform the PT on the production system, but that running a command, if you don't know what you are trying to run, can actually stop something or can actually interfere with the running service, where your production system can stop or it can crash. So for example, if you try to do a buffer overflow or a production system, and if it gets crashed, so that will actually stop your business. So there's a risk if you are doing something that without knowing like what you actually trying to do. And you should have a proper permission. So for example, even if the production server gets crashed, you should be able to convince that this was a part of test and the server could not handle the uh, this particular exploit or something, and that's where you need to patch that particular server to handle that vulnerability. But yeah, so most of the security tools requires root privileges. Means I means whatever tools I use, they look the open Kali scripts or open source tools, so they require the root privileges. And if you are using that particular PT system, that should be under your position only, super protected, and nobody should be able to log in. All the logs should travel through your SIEM, whatever you are trying to do. There will be whitelisting, but you should be able to do a forensics afterwards if something is happening through your PT lab or through your PT system. So that's where you need to actually take a screenshots or collect the logs of the things that you're trying to do.
All right. So, the last two questions that we'll take are difference between CVSS 2x base score and CVSS 3x base score.
Okay, so frankly speaking, I don't know the difference between CVSS 2 and 3 because I'm using CVSS 3 only. But I guess there were some factors added in case of base and temporal, but I'm not sure about that.
All right, all right. We have another question, last question before you again proceed, from Mr. Sunil Yadav. If a tool provides both agent-based and agentless solution, then which is more recommended mechanism to report vulnerabilities that will have lesser false positives?
Agent based is something that will give you a power of credential scans. So I will recommend the agent based scanning if you want to identify vulnerabilities with power of credential scan. So for example, you just don't consider that hackers will know nothing, but as soon as uh, they crack your password, they get into your system. So then also you need to protect some systems. So for example, if you have a vulnerable Linux components which can actually allow you to escalate your privileges easily, so you want to fix those so that your limited privileged user should not be able to escalate his privileges and become root user. So that's where agent-based scans acts like a credential scanning mechanism. Non-agent based scans, there you need to provide the credentials and they will actually do the same thing. But but the other advantage of agent based scanning is there will be no network traffic. So they will actually pull out all the plugins and then they will scan accordingly, and they will just report at the end to that particular uh, scanner portal. But in case of non-agent based scanning, you have to host some internal scanners, and then they will scan all your network ranges, flooding your network, etc. So there are some advantage of agent based scanning.
Okay, thanks, Abhilash. I think you should again take up the session. And just to let everyone know that we will let you know about uh, our recorded sessions. Do fill in the form that we have shared on both LinkedIn and YouTube. Any problems in filling, or you are still not being able to access the form, we will again share it. And please stay tuned to till the end of the session, because we will be sharing the form as well as we will let you know about the free takeaway. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Abhilash. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So next part is actually a vulnerability exploitation. So as of now, you were on the vulnerability assessment part, but as soon as you come to exploit any vulnerability identified by the scanners, or by looking at the software version and knowing the CVs, that's where the exploitation comes. Uh, so you actually exploit the vulnerability, like you do the privilege escalation, you laterally move, or means if there's a vulnerability which allows you to anonymous login, so you actually go and log in and see how you logged in and now what you can access in case of FTP, or in case of web admin portal, if there's a known credentials being used. So you can, when you actually log in and see the screen and you try to exfiltrate something or you try to learn something, so that is being called as an exploitation. So this is the advanced thing that you do as a penetration testing, where you should have a skills of privilege escalations, lateral movements, data exfiltration, remote code exploitations, injections, etc. The thing is, this particular step will be limited to what knowledge you possess actually. So if you are a beginner, you don't know how to uh, run mimic ads or how to run some advanced network security tools, so you'll be limited to actually exploit that vulnerability and uh, being happy about exploiting that, but you'll not be able to further escalate that to a lateral movement from normal system to a server inside your organization. So that's where the vulnerability exploitation steps comes, where you actually try to focus on critical systems like crown jewels, and you try to identify multiple ways to get inside your crown jewel, and try to uh, actually test all the security mechanisms that are protecting that particular critical server. Okay, so next is vulnerability reporting. So reporting is very important. Means in case of, means I worked in a consulting firm where I used to actually create a report or create a Excel based document to share the vulnerabilities with my clients. But it can be challenging if you are working in a product based company, and if you are having more than 1,000 2,000 systems, and then you don't know the asset owners or the system owners of those particular vulnerabilities, so it will be challenging. So your job can be identifying the owners then, and then reporting them the vulnerabilities, following up with them for closure of those vulnerabilities, etc. And in product based companies, people use ticket based tools like Jira. In consulting, people actually generate PDF reports and provide them to the clients. uh, uh, if you are a senior manager expecting something better out of the engagement, you will also ask the VAPT guy to provide a PowerPoint presentation which will tell you the overview of your security structure in terms of VAPT. So you need to work on the Jira tickets or PDF reports or PowerPoint presentations just to present your vulnerabilities. The another thing is, when you prepare a report, if the intended audience is developer, so you may want to tell them the remediations that are available in the market, so for a particular vulnerability, all the remediations, and then let them decide which one to choose. But if you are reporting that particular vulnerabilities or a report to a CISO or a senior management, so then they will be interested to know what is being what is on stake. So for example, if a financial data or a personal data, if there's a breach or what, means they won't be interested in knowing very technical terms, but they will be interested in knowing how it will impact on the business financially and in terms of brand reputation. So it's quite important to think in that perspective as well, not only in technical perspective but in terms of brand and monetary perspective as well. Okay, so we discussed this, that difference between VA and PT is just that PT step gets a vulnerability exploitation as an extra step, and this is where uh, people need to learn the exploitation, because asset discovery, vulnerability scanning, vulnerability identification is something that is now entirely tool based. Means even if you don't put extra efforts for these steps, that's fine, or the tools has all of this. But exploitation is something that needs manual efforts to exploit that particular vulnerability, and it is purely based on how knowledgeable you are. So let's learn about VAPT types. So for example, in case of infrastructure, uh, on-prem infrastructure VAPT was there since the beginning, but now as people are moving to cloud, so cloud infrastructure VAPT is becoming the need of an hour, I'll say. Uh, please don't confuse this with cloud security. Cloud security is something that you try to actually go by the some guidelines and you try to secure your cloud. uh, Cloud VAPT is something you try to break into cloud, you try to identify vulnerabilities. It can be the internal assessment, it can be the external assessment, but most of the time your cloud resources will be inside your private VPC, and very few ports will be open over the internet, and that's where you will do the external PT on those exposed ports. And if you want to do an internal VAPT, you need to have a VPN connection or a host in your particular PT system inside that infrastructure, where you can actually access all the cloud resources to exploit them. uh, Another infrastructure VAPT also is there, known as wireless VAPT. But organizations, so they actually use strong access points, etc. With means the industry standard now says you use your WPA2 standard for wireless security, etc. So most of the time wireless security is not being done actively in VAPT, but it's a part, and it's good to learn the wireless VAPT as well. Means to how to actually de-authenticate the connected users, and how to grab the Wi-Fi password is something that you need to learn. And based on the configuration of your customers or your Wi-Fi access point, you will be able to actually break into the wireless networks as well. uh, on the application side, there are web application PTs, mobile application API, and thick client penetration testings. Out of that, thick client is something that is of more interest to the clients which are actually in the business of thick clients. So for example, Microsoft Teams is a thick client. If you have a robotic process automation tools like RPA, UiPath, so there will be thick clients of that RPA process which you want to perform the pen testing on. But quite famous is web, mobile, and APIs. So let's take questions if anyone has.
Okay. So there is one question which I think Abhilash, you can address at the end of the session, where people are asking about how you can recommend a career in this field for any beginner. You can just keep a pointer open for discussing the same at the end of your session. We'll take some of the other questions, like what is your recommendation for the asset management solution to identify the system owners, as this is a big headache for any organizations employing a security solution.
Okay, so anybody will tell you like you should have a CMDB for asset management. But again, like if you have a really cluttered infrastructure, not knowing who owns what, so it's best to then actually grab the servers and their owners, and then let them integrate their to their servers, so like VM provisioning servers I'm talking about. So for example, VMware vSpheres or vCenters, from where you actually spin up VMware ESXis, and VMware ESXis will have multiple VMs again. So you then capture the get the VMware vCenter owners to integrate their vCenter to the CMDB, and from that CMDB, whatever so from that vCenter, whatever ESXis they are spinning, so that should be automatically recorded in the CMDB. And you should first consider that particular vCenter owner as responsible for whatever spinning from his particular server, and then he should identify what ESXis are assigned to whom, like who requested that ESXis, and they should actually uh, add that information over your CMDB. Because this is something, if everybody contributes, it's a job of one day. If nobody is contributing, then only the network team and the security team cannot do anything in this case. Because if I am being a developer, if I own 5 VMs and nobody knows that all of those VMs has same host name, only the different IP addresses, so in that case nobody will know who owns that if your infrastructure is large enough. So it's important that you actually communicate to the people that we are trying to gather information, and you report all your assets that you own. Else, whatever assets we found in a network without knowing the owner, we will shut them down. That was the approach that one of my client took, and then the engineers were like proactive to tell that these are my systems, I'm actively testing them, I'm actually doing a development, please don't shut this down, and this is where I'm reporting that these are owned by me. And then that's where like they were able to at least like 70-80% systems they were able to track. And then they shut down 20% systems, and as soon as they went offline, then people started tracking like why my system is offline, and they then reached out to IT team, telling that these systems are offline, I own them, and that's where they updated their CMDB again. But once you update the CMDB, then there should be a policy of having a unique max. There should not be a duplicate max. If your CMDB or asset discovery tools identifies two systems with same MAC, you should actually change that MAC, because virtual systems can have a same MAC address. I hope that answers your question.
Um, yes. So we have a question like, do you mean thick clients as Windows-based application like .exe package products?
Yes, they can be. Most of the time they will be exe based only, but then similar implementations are available for Mac systems and Linux as well as in packages, but they are not so famous in terms of doing a VAPT. Most of the time people prefer to do VAPT on the Windows packages.
All right. So okay, Abhilash, I think you can continue.
Okay, so the one thing that I wanted to tell you is, if you know any red teamer who is doing a red team engagement for your organization, or if any one of them is your friend, so he will be having a knowledge of all these areas, because red teamers needs to learn. They try to learn as they get the targets, and immediately like they start exploring what is in front of them, whether it's a wireless, if they got the password to wireless, and from then how to laterally move to the inside systems. So that's where they actually actively try to identify the ways to navigate through all different technologies, whether it's a web or whether it's a on-prem infra. So red teamers will be the highly qualified or highly expert people in the area of VAPT, I will say. Okay, so let's start to the topic. Means the few of the members like who are beginners wanted to know how to start with VAPT. So the first thing that I wanted to tell you is, means when I started VAPT, I was like, I used to actually save each and every course that I'm getting through torrent or through Telegram, and I never actually looked through those courses, whether it's a cracked OSCP material, whether it's a Udemy courses, uh, a pen tester academic courses. All of you, like if you are already in the security domain, all of you might have downloaded those and stored them on your hard drives or Google drives. But I was one of them, but I could not actually go through the details of any of that course. I learned everything from doing the testings in my company. It was consulting company, and there were team members who were like doing the same stuff. So there were discussions around the team. If I'm not able to actually exploit any vulnerability, I used to take the help from my teammate or my senior who is actually pro into that. And that's how I learned that, okay, so the vulnerability can be exploited by this way as well and that way as well. There are multiple ways to exploit one vulnerability. There are resources available. It's just that the thing that yeah, people don't get to know, like where should they start. So even now I'm not you know more focused on what you should means which courses you should take and what videos you should see. I'm more focused on what you should learn in case of starting in the VAPT. So the first thing is knowing about the basic networking. So you need to know uh, basics in the networking. So for example, what is LAN, WAN, CAN, MAN, and logical classifications, like what is distributed network, what is client server network, what is internet, intranet, DMZ. Because knowing that only will help you if you go by any of the other topics like web or infrastructure PT. Next one is the OSI and TCP model in detail. So why this is important? Because all the scanning techniques are based on the TCP IP header, where you need to know the three-way handshake, what is SYN, what is SYNAC, what is acknowledgement, when it is called as connect scan, when it is called as SYN scan, or different scans. So that all depends on the basic networking and TCP IP headers. So these are some topics that are important to learn. And I know one good resource known as omnisecure.com, which has a separate web page called as basic networking, and they cover all of this. Means if you just read by them, you will get to know what are wireless technologies, how many types of 802.11, 802.1x, what are the LAN technologies, what is fiber optics cable, what are the network devices like switch, router, or a firewall, or advanced next gen firewall, what are the network topologies like bridge, circuit, etc., etc. One of the most thing is knowing the most common ports like DNS, DSCP, HTTP, SMTP, SNMP, etc. Means whatever you know as a common ports, you should learn about that. You should at least know that they are being used for some purpose. So, for example, HTTP is being used for serving the web pages, and SMTP is for the emails. So you should know that SNMP is something for the internal communication between the servers. So that is something that you should know out of that particular network ports and protocols. You should also know that DNS works on port 53, and SMTP works on port 25 and 995 as well. So you should know the difference between them. So you should go by basic networking before you start any VAPT learnings. You should also read basic cryptography, because whenever you go to the web application PT or infrastructure PT, you will see some cryptographic elements. So, for example, any scanner will tell you that this particular website has weak protocols, weak SSL protocols, and weak SSL ciphers available. But now, if you don't know, means most of the time, like initially 3 4 years in my career, I never looked at the details of the ciphers that are being shown, because the tool used to actually highlight that, okay, this is the weak cipher, and I used to report that. But why that is weak, what weakness is there? So those should be some those are some basic details that you should know, that there's a collision. There's the collision is the weakness. That is the reason that MD5 is a weak and should not be used. So those are the cryptographic weaknesses, and that's where you should not use MD5 or just SHA, but you should use SHA 256, 512, or you should use bcrypt for the password encryption, and you should not use SHA for the password encryption. So those are some basic details that cryptography teaches you. So for example, what is symmetric and asymmetric cryptography? So most of the time interviewer will ask you how TLS works and which cryptographic methods it uses. So basically TLS uses both methods, asymmetric and symmetric as well. So you should know like how it does that and why it does that. So that's gets covered into the basic cryptography. Then read about different viruses, virus types. So, for example, malware, swarms, ransomware, Trojan horse, rootkits. Because any application. So, for example, if you are a pen tester, uh, anything that you are doing can also be replicated by a malware. So, for example, a malware can automate the exploitation process that you are doing manually by using some tools. So, you should also consider the factor that the exploiters, pen testers are not only the humans, they are the malwares and viruses as well. So, you should know the differences between these Trojan horse, rootkits, etc. And if you go through the this particular site omnisecure.com, you will get to learn all of these things. Means that one website and that 2 3 blogs are sufficient to read the basics. uh, that's it. Means you don't need to then read any CCNA book or any other resource. Like you need not to see any YouTube videos as well for the basic networking and basic cryptography. So this is the simple and starting point, I will say, if anybody wants to start with the VAPT. I would want to take some questions on this. Do we have any questions, Sam?
No, I think you can go ahead. And
Okay,
anyway,
cool.
we are very close to our end time as well. So, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. So once you learn through basics, next one is the web application PT. Whatever you see in the web application on the screen, web application, mobile application, API, infrastructure. I will say if you are a beginner, you should focus on the web application PT, because once you learn the web application PT, web applications consumes APIs, so you will cover 90% of the test cases of API security testing. Mobile applications also consume APIs. As you are testing them on the web application, you can test them on mobile applications as well. Mobile application will have a platform specific test cases that are different, and that can be actually done in a time of week or so. Means you can learn the platform specific test cases of Android and iOS in a week, and you can start applying them from the next week or from the day one, I will say, because you just need to follow the steps for the decompiling the application and looking through the Android manifest files and running some tools like mobsf or browser. But those things are actually like pretty straightforward. So you focus on web application PT and exploiting the web vulnerabilities, and you will be 80 90% ready for mobile application PT and API security testing. So once you start learning the web application, you should learn the fundamentals, and the fundamentals are like everything in the web goes by HTTP request and response. So you should know each and everything in the HTTP request and response. Then you should know how actually, like when you add any URL in the browser, how it provides you the response and what happens in the background, how DNS works, etc. So those things you should know. And once you know these basic things, I will not recommend going by any tool. I will recommend going by a testing guide actually. So if you refer a OWASP testing guide, and you will see a vulnerability called privilege escalation, and they have provided at least 4 to 5 examples like how it can be exploited. And there should be at least one way that your application will have that particular one way. Out of those 4 5 examples, you can test by that way. So the best thing to practice is to look through the examples that are given, because those are the real examples exploited previously by different hackers. Next thing is, you can go on a HackerOne and Bugcrowd or a similar platforms, and you will see some good vulnerabilities being reported. There are bounties awarded to them, and those vulnerabilities are like SSRF, SQL injection, and you should actually see how they are being exploited. So reading a step by step walkthrough is 90% similar to exploiting a vulnerability. Means once you read a walkthrough, and if I present you the application with same bug, you should be actually able to replicate those step by step processes looking at the reference that you have. And that's where, if you are focusing on one particular vulnerability, let's say SQL injection, you try to at least get 10 examples of SQL injection, 10 ways how the SQL injection was exploited. You will see same steps were followed until people exploit the SQL injection. So now you practice for the 10 times, and now you just need to apply that on whatever application you are testing. And the most important thing, like if you're looking to crack interviews for a web application PT or being a VAPT, so each and every attack you try to read and exploit, you should be able to explain that with practical examples. So for example, I need to create a story that means if I have actually exploited any SQL injection in app, so I should know that app was e-commerce app. There was a login page, login and username and password, and then I tried to actually put a query breaker of SQL injection like a single quote, and query was break, error was generated, and then I did further steps. So that's how you should be able to tell the interviewer that this is the way I exploited. Uh, that is one most common example. You should at least know two to three examples the way you exploited any particular vulnerability. And it is also important to know the remediations. So for example, interviewer will ask you what is the difference between parameterized queries and store procedures, and which one is better. So you should be able to tell them, and you can only tell them if you know the difference, and if you know how both those gets implemented. So remediations are also important while giving the interviews or while suggesting anybody, like for your developers, which one to implement and which one to not. So focus on remediations as well, and learn to write well articulate reports. Like, so for example, your report should have a severity, whether it's a critical or high. It should have an impact on that application or on that business. It should have a step by step process to how to regenerate that vulnerability. And you should have remediations, phase remediation. So for example, if you are telling somebody to add a security header, you should actually show them the steps, like so adding a screenshot, like you go to this particular file, configuration file, and then you enable this. So that's the step by step recommendation that you are providing to him, so it's easy for him to fix that particular vulnerability in a limited time. So that is what a detailed recommendation or remediation is. And you should write reports with all of these. That will be called as an well articulate report. uh, so if you want to start with, I will suggest Port Sugar Academy for web application and try hackme.com. These are the two resources. First one is the free one, second one is the low cost one. You'll be able to practice on these two resources. And everybody knows that OS Top 10 is a framework that is widely being used to test the web applications. OS provides a testing guide. OS provides the checklists as well. So you take a vulnerability, you try to identify that vulnerability using 10 different methods. And please remember that if you don't get to exploit that vulnerability, there will be two reasons. Either the vulnerability is not present, or you are not knowledgeable to exploit the vulnerability at that time. But covering all the test cases is important. Okay, next one is mobile. As I mentioned, like you, once you learn the web application PT, there will be only platform specific test cases and static test cases you need to learn in terms of mobile application PT. The most challenging part in any mobile application PT is bypassing their root detection and bypassing their SSL pinning protections. And you need to learn different methods to bypass root and root detection, and different methods to bypass SSL pinning, both on Android and iOS. So that will be time consuming for you. Other than that, all the test cases for mobile application PT will be straightforward, looking at the references and going by that vulnerability, testing that vulnerability in particular area. So I will suggest you use Genymotion emulator because it's quite easy to set up for Androids, and I haven't found any good free emulator for iOS. So I will suggest an old iPhone for testing of iOS applications. So The only courses that are available are from Pentester Academy, that are also quite old now, but they were mobile application courses from Pentester Academy previously. And if you search for mobile app pen testing or Google, you will find many blogs on Medium or the references mentioned here, that how to test any particular vulnerability step by step. You can learn from that. Okay, moving forward to API security testing. Uh, so as I mentioned, 80% things will be covered in the web only, and now the mobile as well. There will be 20% things. So for example, you can test APIs in web, you can test APIs that are in the mobile, but there can be a time where you need to test only APIs, which is the product of a company. So those APIs you need to open in a tool called Postman, and those APIs will be REST APIs. You will see request and responses. And now, if you want to test the API, so you need to learn how to capture the request from Postman to Burp Suite or any other proxy tool. And once you capture that proxy, like a request in proxy tool, the test cases will be similar to what you did in the web application. There are few things like authentication and authorization methods used in the APIs. So for example, OAuth 2.0, OpenID, OpenID Connect, JWT tokens. So there are weaknesses in these areas as well. So I will suggest you go buy a free certification course on the API Academy uh, and apisecuniversity.com. So you will learn the weaknesses in the API security areas as well, like in the OAuth 2.0, OpenID, and how to test them, because these are like small 2-hour courses, which also provides you the certifications to showcase on LinkedIn, and they are good to know the vulnerabilities in the areas of authentication and authorization technologies. Last one is the infrastructure PT. As I mentioned, like, so in case of infrastructure PT, the courses are quite famous, like OSCP by Offensive Security and PNPT by TCM Security. So these two courses are quite famous, and everybody from the security industry must know that there are these two courses in case of infrastructure VAPT. And the thing is, uh, you need at least to begin, you need to learn about the host discovery techniques, port scanning techniques using nmap or similar tools. You need to learn how to configure policies in any license tool like Tenable, Nessus, or Qualys Guard. You need to learn how to identify vulnerabilities based on the software versions. uh, One of the best thing is, if you are using any commercial tool, it will tell you whether that exploit is available on the metasploit or not. If not, then only you have to search for the exploit over internet through different GitHub repositories or different sites. But if that exploit is available in the metasploit itself, so there can be integrations within the tools like Tenable, Nessus, and Metasploit, where you can actually speed up the exploitation. So these are some things that you need to focus on. And as you learn the common TCP and UDP ports and protocols, the vulnerabilities will be based on that only. So you have to practice them and apply them in the real world. So the best thing to practice is the try hackme.com and hack the box in case of infrastructure PT. And if you want to go by the paid courses, then Pentester Lab is there, Altered Security boot camps are also there. And if you go by the certification, then OSCP and PNPTs are there. Okay, so we are at the end of our session. So do we want to take any questions, Sam?
Now, I think people who are really looking forward to some career gyan on how to pursue, I think those are certain things that you can cover up in this session. And yeah, we can conclude it. We are already 20 past
Yeah.
13. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, like, whoever is looking to start into VAPT, the first thing is, if you can afford, go for good trainings. Like, so if you have already tried all these things, learning through videos, going reading through blogs, and still you're not able to make it, then I will say you go for guided training. If you cannot afford that, but if you are really looking to learn through the blogs, through the videos, etc., So we will be sharing one mind map that how you can actually learn, for example, a TCP IP from which blog or from which video. So you should follow that particular mind map to learn that particular area. So for example, web application PT, this particular vulnerability, and if mobile, this particular vulnerability. So if you follow that mind map, and if you can actually put your time into that, so you will be able to do that by self. But if you're not able to do by yourself, then I will recommend you go by the guided training which is available. I will also say, if you are actually looking for a career, don't just go by a bug bounty for a bug bounty trainings. Bug bounty trainings are good, but they will not prepare you to fully test the application. They are more focused on identifying a single or couple of vulnerabilities that can give you the bounties, but they will not cover all the test cases for any single application. So that's it. Means here are some tips, but these are actually repeated.
So, okay, I think that should conclude our session. Thank you, everyone, from the Ministry of Security team. I hope you have all received the Google form. Please take some time out and fill that up so that we can get back to you. And don't forget to follow our page because we keep posting very important documents, as well as if you want to keep tab of our next events, our LinkedIn page is your go-to. So we really hope to catch up again on our next session, and keep an eye on our page as we keep posting very interesting stuffs for you. So thank you once again. Thank you, Abhilash, for your time. I hope
Yeah.
you also had a very nice interactive session with lots of questions coming in, and we really struggled a bit to wind it up on time. So thank you once again. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, we have one last question. Please, please go
Yeah.
ahead. Thank you. I mean, yeah, everyone is pouring in their thank you notes, Abhilash. So I should let you know that you shouldn't be missing out on those. Thank you
Yeah,
so
thank you.
much. Any sample of report, Abhilash? Over to you on that.
I can share that, maybe like in the communication that you'll be forwarding to the people.
Okay, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will share one sample report which is well written, explaining all the things, which will be really useful for you to refer.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much, MOS, for giving me the opportunity.
All it's all our pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Abhilash.